from the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you're with us tonight. It is Tuesday, December 8th, moving right on through 2020. I know a lot of people are ready to have this year go behind us. Tonight, we are talking about the pandemic and its impact on small businesses. And we have with us a fellow with the Foundation for Economic Education. We'll tell you what that foundation is. Talking about an article she's written about the pandemic's impact on small businesses. So all of our guests now join us via Zoom. We'll turn to our Zoom and welcome Hannah Cox. Thank you very much, Hannah, for being here.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Where are you, in New York?
No, I am a COVID refugee. I've left New York and I am hiding out in a red state in South Carolina.
In South Carolina. Okay, very good. Well, thanks for being here. All right, so we're talking about how big government stacked the deck against small businesses. That's the article you wrote. And so I want to get into that, but let's give people some perspective on kind of where you're coming from here. How would you describe your political views? Are you conservative, libertarian? What would you say?
I think I kind of straddle the fence between libertarian and conservative. I have some views that sort of fall on both sides of the camp, but as a whole, my main focus is always policy over politics, and I really am concerned with policies that limit the government, that make sure we have a free market world that we can operate within, and that actually protect individual liberty.
And you write for NewsMax Insider. You also have a show now on YouTube, right?
I do, yes. I just launched a new show. It's called Based with Hannah Cox. It's on YouTube and it's also on Spotify and iTunes. So I'm very excited about that, and continue to write for NewsMax, where I've been an insider for the past 2.5 years. I also write for the Washington Examiner, and recently I became a fellow for FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. So I've been doing a lot lately, and I also still work full-time in criminal justice reform as well.
All right, so there's a lot going on there. All right, so how big government stacked the deck against small businesses? What's the essence of what you're saying here?
Well, over the past couple of months, I consistently see online a lot of people talking about how Walmart and Amazon and some of these really big corporations, Netflix, they've all really increased their revenues, their bottom lines during the lockdowns and during this pandemic, while we know that so many small businesses have been absolutely pummeled due to government lockdowns, due to the pandemic itself, just due to the economic response to the pandemic. And so there's this really disparate outcome going on that I think people are right to note. But so often the criticism I saw from people in this vein was coming from people on the left, and were kind of pointing their fingers at these corporations and saying, look, they're big greedy corporations. And of course, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And oftentimes even blaming capitalism for that scenario, when in reality, they're not wrong about the end result. They're not wrong about this being a problem, but they are wrong about why this became a problem. And if you really trace back the roots of the policies and what happened, what transpired over the past 10 months, government has been heavily involved in this picture. And if it weren't for actions government took, especially back in March, April, and May, we would never have seen this scenario be able to play out in an actual free market. And so I wanted to write a piece that actually dug into that for people, that walked them back through the policy decisions, economic decisions that were made, and how that ended with this result. Because as a libertarian, I can agree with them. It is a problem. I don't think the companies deserve blame. I think a lot of those companies provided essential services that we needed and responses that we needed in this pandemic. But the point is, a lot of small businesses could have done the same thing had they been allowed to by the government. They largely were not.
It is very interesting that the stock market is exploding. The stock market is doing really, really well. And there's so many people who are not doing well. And as you mentioned in the article, there's, Amazon, Walmart, Google, Apple. These big companies have had good years, right?
Oh, yeah. Bang-up years. I mean, they're breaking records for how good of a year they've had. It really is a story of two pandemics. And I think that a lot of us who work in this kind of world see that, right? We have largely been unimpacted by this. I know my day-to-day hasn't really changed that much. I don't get to travel as much as I used to, but I've added jobs. My job market's doing just fine. I've not been economically hurt by this. And that's not the case for millions and millions of people in this country, but it's very segregated. And I think so often we're really focusing on the stock market's doing well, the companies are doing well, and that's not a full picture of where the economy is, of how Americans are doing. And I think it's right for us to point out that people are struggling, that there's been a lot of intense cronyism that's transpired over the past couple of months. Again, and I hope we have time to get into this in the article, I talk about some of the decisions government made, some of the things that were in their legislation that actually ended up hurting small business and stacking the deck against them throughout the course of this epidemic that we're facing. And so I think we should be talking about both sides of the coin. You know, it's great when big companies do well. I have no problem with anybody being successful or making money. But when we're creating a system that's rigged and that treats companies differently and that comes in and tells hardworking Americans who have built small businesses, which I'll remind people, employ most people in this country. Most people are not employed by big business. Most people are employed by small to medium-sized businesses in this country. And they're getting absolutely lambasted. We expect almost a third of small businesses to ultimately close permanently at the end of all this. That's a really big deal. That's not just jobs lost. That's people's lifetime savings gone. That's their investments. That's their hard work taken away with really no recourse or repercussions for that. And that's a really dire situation for our economy, but also I think just for our American spirit and for the American dream.
When you say intense cronyism and government policies have kind of led to this, what do you mean?
Well, I mean a couple of things. First and foremost, we saw that with the lockdowns, they've always been arbitrarily enforced. They were not evenly applied. And what we typically see happen is when government comes in and implements a really bad decision that's going to hurt some people, the companies that have means, the companies that can employ to pay big lobbyists, the companies that pad the pockets of politicians, they can come in and lobby for loopholes to where they're not impacted by the worst parts of government's decisions. And that's largely what happened. We didn't see all businesses get shut down. We saw certain businesses get shut down, and disproportionately we saw small businesses get shut down. So that there then in of itself stacked the deck against the little guy in this country. And then to make it worse, they came in and they passed the CARES Act, which was the largest piece of crony legislation I've ever seen in my life. It was absolutely stuffed with pork, with corporate welfare, with protectionism, with favoritism, and it really did come in and further just disadvantage the little guy, the small businesses in our society. We saw the bulk of that amount of money go to big business. Ultimately, we saw only 5% of small businesses even receive the PPP loans. We saw that of the trillions of dollars that were allocated in that piece of legislation, only a couple $100 billion were set aside for small business. And even then, some of those dollars were erroneously sent to bigger businesses, to medium-sized businesses. And so it just really did come in and take the tax dollars of these people and of American citizens who've been paying their taxes, doing the right thing, running these small businesses. And then it turned around and it gave it to their competitors and also shut them down simultaneously. And so if you want to be mad at somebody, and you should, the answer is to be mad at the politicians and at the government who actually carried all of these policies out. You wouldn't have seen Amazon, Netflix, Walmart have these massive sales if all of these other businesses hadn't been shut down in the way that they were this year.
So are you saying the shutdown then was wrong, or the way the money was distributed was wrong? Because some would say we had a pandemic, we are having a pandemic, we had to do something. And so some of these shutdowns, again, they're there to keep people safe, and it was something that needed to be done.
No, I would say both are wrong. And I would say the data backs up that fact. We know now irrevocably that lockdowns do not prevent spread of the disease. And so I know that we were in a pandemic. I know that people were demanding responses, but I think people in charge, leaders, their job is to ensure that their responses do not make the repercussions, do not make the effects of the crisis worse. And that's what the lockdowns did. We now see that we have severe mental health crises in this country. We see that kids are falling behind in schooling. We see that families are being torn apart. People are dying alone. People are losing their livelihoods. We see the economy continue to get pummeled. We see that this is going to have a dire impact on people that were already struggling in America, and now that's going to be amplified even more.
But we also see COVID spreading. I mean, it's also spreading like wildfire. And so medical experts believe one way to stop that is for people to be socially distanced and the shutdown maybe did have an impact early on. Maybe we didn't know everything. But I mean, is this kind of you quarterbacking, Monday morning quarterbacking, saying, or now Tuesday or Wednesday morning quarterbacking, saying, oh, we shouldn't have done that because it doesn't work? We had this pandemic. It was a desperate situation, and what was decided was let's be socially distanced. Let's close some things down. I think some things have opened back up, and now things have been pretty open, and the disease is spreading like crazy right now.
The disease is spreading. We do see some spikes in cases, but the death rate is not increasing. And we do see as a whole that this disease is not nearly as deadly as we first anticipated. I think it's fine to practice social distancing. I think it's fine to practice wearing masks. I think that's up to individuals to decide what's best for them, and they largely will do that and have been doing that. But I certainly don't think we have any evidence that shows the lockdowns have worked. And I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking. I said this all the way back in April. I wrote a piece back then called "A Crisis is a Perfect Time to Seize Power." And largely everything I predicted in that piece did come to pass and has continued to have really dire implications for our society and for individuals. We know beyond the shadow of a doubt that lockdowns do not prevent the disease from spreading. You can't hide in your house and escape a virus. It's something that we have to face as a society, and it's something that we should be giving really clear communication on, which our government has consistently failed to do. It's something that we need to be removing government regulations around, and we need to be letting the market respond. There is no reason that we shouldn't already have rapid testing available, people able to make sure that they can contact trace. We haven't seen a lot of those things really gear up, and I'm promising you could trace that back to government regulations that have made it hard for innovators and companies to come in and produce the things they need to do. We think that we'll see the vaccine in the near future. Even that, you could point to things around the FDA that have slowed the process. So at the end of the day, what needed to be done is for government to get out of the way and let people have the information they needed to appropriately respond in their own lives, and not come in and make the disease worse by doing things like shutting down businesses.
Well, then let's go back to, I think it's an interesting conversation. Go back to when this all started. So it's February. We've seen it go across China. We've seen it come across Europe. I remember in February we were seeing what was happening in Italy, and then it comes here. New York is being hit very hard, and hospitals are in really bad shape in New York. We're not seeing that here in Tennessee at that point, and so there was this shutdown. What are you saying we should have done? Just ignore it, or what are you saying we should have done?
Well, I was in New York City at the height of it. I was living there, and I stayed through March and April, so I had a first up-close personal experience to see what was going on there. And as a whole, government did everything possible to make it worse. The only reason we ever saw the death rate skyrocket in New York City is because of really asinine public policies they had in place. They had all kinds of really ridiculous regulations, some that had been put in place before the pandemic, some that actually were put in place after they knew it was spreading. But all in all, things that said certain ambulance companies had to take people to overflowing hospitals. They then had to be checked into those hospitals before they could be transferred to the response hospitals sitting open across the road with doctors twiddling their thumbs. We saw thousands of beds that had been set up, that had been provided by the federal government to try to deal with overflow, to try to ensure that people were getting the care that they needed. That didn't happen because of regulations that left people to die largely in public hospitals. The disproportionate outcome of deaths in the New York City hospitals between public hospitals and private hospitals is really overwhelming. I wrote another piece for the Washington Examiner digging into that data. As a whole, we saw that when people got care in New York City, they largely were able to overcome the disease and be okay. But what happened was, because the hospitals were overflowing because of bad regulatory policy, people largely died because they couldn't get a bed, they couldn't get the care, they couldn't get the attention that they needed. And it was quite scary. But again, this goes back to New York City policies and things their government did that was really stupid. We also saw them send very sick people back into nursing homes. If you look at the death rates for the Northeast region, which largely employed these policies and did so early on, the death rate there continues to be far higher than we've seen throughout the rest of the country. And I would trace it back to those kinds of policies. Where I'm at in South Carolina, we've been open since May. Our hospitals have never been overwhelmed. We have never seen our death rate skyrocket like that. And that's because people are doing common sense, basic approaches to this. We are social distancing. We are wearing masks. We are contact tracing and self-quarantining when we think we've been exposed. These are sensible things to do. We don't need to shut down business in order for people to do those sensible things.
So there are some things that I think we have learned. Would you support a nationwide mask mandate?
No, again, I think you need to communicate with people, tell them the best ways to protect themselves, and let people do it. I work in criminal justice reform. We have enough laws already, and we have enough people sitting in our jails over those stupid laws. The last thing we need to do is add another law to our books that we're then going to fine people over, push people further into poverty over, send people to jail over, which, by the way, that's another problem during COVID. We haven't done a good job at getting people out of our jails who are unable to socially distance and unable to get the items that they need to take best care of themselves. And there's a lot of nonviolent people that really shouldn't have been in jail in the first place that we've still done a very bad job of getting out. So the last thing I would want to do is implement another law that could put more people in there.
So now we are where we are. So, okay, you disagree with how it was handled getting to this point. Now we are, stock market's booming, but a lot of people are in dire financial shape. Certainly small businesses are in dire financial shape. There's talk about another stimulus. Certainly many people think that's needed. What do you think the path forward should be? How much should be spent on this stimulus? Should it be a big stimulus package or not?
Well, there were a lot of problems and things that could have been learned from not only with this stimulus package we already did, but also from the bailouts of 2008. We didn't learn those lessons for the CARES Act. I don't have a lot of reason to think we'll learn them this time around. I think if anything should be done, I think taxpayers who have paid money into the system for years and years and years and years, if they're having their livelihood taken away, if they're having their jobs taken away, they should be given stimulus money. But I think it should go directly to individuals. There should be absolutely no corporate welfare. It should not go to businesses. As a whole, we need to push back, and state legislators can do this, right? We've seen a lot of governors come in and act unilaterally and work through executive action and fiat, and we've not seen state legislators stand up, take a stand up for their constituents, stand up for the Constitution, and push back on some of this, because a lot of what they've done isn't legal. We're starting to see some of the Supreme Court challenges trickle down, and they're working in our favor. We've seen some really solid freedom of religion acts come down, but state legislators need to do more. They've been really delinquent in that, and people need to be demanding action from their state legislators in this regard if they don't want to see this continue. They need to get out of the way. They need to let businesses reopen. You would,
is that true? You would support like the $1,200 checks that went to individuals. That was good, but the money that went to businesses, and the reason, of course, they say the money went to businesses is so that they could continue paying people to paycheck protection programs so they wouldn't have to lay people off. Was that just corporate welfare?
Yes, largely. And in the piece, I included a lot of those breakdowns. But we did see that, again, most of these went to very big companies like Boeing. Boeing needed to be bailed out. Are you kidding? After all the trillions we give them for our military industrial complex budget every year? Yeah, right. Get out of here. No way. We saw tons of money go to the airlines. We saw a lot of big business get bailed out. Again, I think it should go to the individuals, but I also don't think it should just go to every individual. Right did I get $1,200? I'm not out of a job. I didn't need $1,200. They sent $1,200 to dead people. We have data showing they sent $1,200 to random European citizens. They need to make sure that if they are going to send out more money, that it's to the people actually being hurt. And again, I think, the increased help if people are unemployed due to this is fine. But what really needs to happen is they need to get out of the way and let people get back to work. That's what Americans want. Americans don't want a handout. They're not looking to permanently be on the government's dime. What they want is to keep their businesses. What they want is to get back to work. They want to ensure that the things they've built aren't destroyed, aren't taken away. We're starting to see a lot of these business owners rise up, especially in places like California, where they continue to enforce arbitrary rules. They're not even allowing outside dining. That makes no sense. So hopefully we really do see some people come to the aid of business owners like this, because at the end of the day, another stimulus act is just a Band-Aid. What really needs to happen is our economy needs to be able to open back up.
And what really needs to happen is the pandemic needs to get under control. And so if you just turn a blind eye to the pandemic, if you just say, okay, businesses, do whatever you want to do, doesn't the pandemic then just get even further out of control? It is good news we have a vaccine coming, but I wonder if that is a responsible approach. I'm sure we could say that some things were overdone and we've learned some things as time has gone on, but is it responsible just to say, do what you want to do, be responsible if you want to be, go do your thing? Wouldn't the pandemic just explode? Well, we've seen what's happened with all these government mandates, and guess what?
the pandemic has exploded. You can't micromanage your way out of a virus, out of a disease. There are all kinds of viruses and diseases that we have to learn to live with in our society, and that we do. We know from history, we know from studies, we know from all the data available to us that when you tell people fair, sensible ways that they can protect themselves and others, they largely do it. The problem is that government has not issued those kinds of fair, just, common sense guidelines, communications. And at this point, I think people are sick of listening to them. At this point, people are fed up. They feel like they've been misled. They've been lied to. They've seen all kinds of things be impacted that make no sense, and they're just over it. So at the end of the day, I don't think government has the ability to stop a pandemic. Again, I think the best way we could stop the pandemic is get government out of the way and let healthcare workers and let the free market respond. I think our concern should be with our hospitals and if they are overwhelmed or not. They largely are not. And as a whole, if people are able to get care, then we need to do the best we can to try to ensure people have good guidelines to move forward. But we can't just stop our society over a disease that has less than a 1% death rate. There's no doubt the message has been muddled. What do you think about the message that there has been on masks? That's now become political, whether you wear a mask or not. Where do you come down on masks? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give scientific ideas on masks. I think that as a whole, I wear a mask when I'm asked to. I wear a mask when I'm in close spaces. If I'm flying all day, certainly I wear a mask. If I'm outside, I don't wear a mask. So it's a personal decision if you want to look at the data and see how you feel you can best use that. I think as a whole, cloth masks aren't nearly as effective as medical grade masks, and we just simply don't have the supply that we need of those for all people to have access to them. I think it's a fine precaution. It's probably not something that's going to keep you irrevocably safe, but it's better than nothing. All right, so that kind of sets the table for the discussion. We have a few calls. Mike, Jack, others, hold on the line. And a few lines open if you want to call in. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.